What if the virgin birth that Christianity celebrates was not an innovation, but an appropriation of a much older mystery tradition that belonged to the priestesses of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of heaven and earth? And what if these priestesses possessed knowledge of parthenogenesis, the capacity to conceive without male participation through activation of latent potentials in the feminine body? And what if this bloodline was systematically hunted and destroyed by the emerging patriarchal religions because it demonstrated that women did not need men to access the creative power of the divine, that the feminine alone contained the complete template for life and consciousness? In the ruins of Uruk, the ancient Sumerian city where Inanna's temple once stood as the largest religious complex in Mesopotamia, there exists a chamber beneath what archaeologists have catalogued as the temple foundations, a vault sealed with such sophisticated engineering that it has remained hidden despite decades of excavation. And in that chamber are clay tablets that record the final testimony of the last high priestess of Inanna, written as the armies of the new god approached to destroy what they could not control. In the autumn of 2021, an archaeogeneticist named Dr. Lydia Novak was studying mitochondrial DNA samples from ancient Sumerian burial sites when she discovered a haplogroup that should not exist according to current models of human genetic evolution, a marker that suggested either contamination of her samples or the existence of a population that had developed genetic variations that science had no framework for explaining. The haplogroup appeared exclusively in female remains that had been buried with ceremonial objects associated with Inanna worship, priestesses whose tombs indicated not just high status, but a specific kind of spiritual authority that seemed to be passed exclusively through the maternal line. Lydia was a skeptic by nature, trained to seek rational explanations for every anomaly, but the data was too consistent, too statistically significant to dismiss. She began researching the history of Inanna worship, delving into Sumerian cuneiform tablets that described the goddess not just as a fertility deity, but as a powerful sovereign, a warrior queen, and a mistress of sacred sexuality whose priestesses were revered as channels for divine power. She found references to the blood of Inanna, a sacred lineage passed from mother to daughter, said to grant the women who carried it the capacity for direct communion with the goddess, and, in some rare cases, the ability to conceive without male seed, a phenomenon described in the texts as the immaculate conception of the starry womb. She found a specific tablet, a lament written by Enheduanna, the first known author in history and a high priestess of Inanna, that spoke of the systematic destruction of Inanna's temples and the persecution of her priestesses by the invading Akkadian armies, who brought with them a new pantheon of male gods and a patriarchal worldview that sought to suppress the feminine divine. Enheduanna's lament spoke of the bloodline of the pure womb being scattered and driven into hiding, its knowledge encoded in symbols and oral traditions that would be passed down in secret until the time was right for its re-emergence. Lydia began to have vivid dreams, not just of ancient Sumer, but of a woman with eyes like molten gold and hair like spun moonlight, a presence that identified itself as Inanna, and that communicated not through words, but through direct transmission of knowing, downloading information into Lydia's consciousness that felt simultaneously ancient and utterly new. In these dreams, Inanna showed her the true meaning of the Immaculate Conception, not as a singular miracle, but as a latent human capacity, a potential encoded in the female genome that could be activated through specific spiritual practices that cultivated a profound connection between the practitioner's womb and the cosmic creative principle. She woke from these dreams with a sense of urgency, a feeling that she was being called to do something far beyond academic research, that her discovery of the haplogroup was not accidental, but destined. She began to trace her own maternal lineage, using both genetic analysis and genealogical records, and she discovered that her own family could be traced back through generations of women who had lived in the Middle East. Women whose oral histories contained fragments of stories about starry wombs and divine conception that had been dismissed as folklore, but that now, in light of the Sumerian texts and her dreams, took on a terrifying and exhilarating new meaning. Lydia traveled to southern Iraq, to the site of ancient Uruk, not as an archaeologist seeking artifacts, but as a seeker of truth, guided by an inner compass that pulled her toward the sealed chamber beneath the temple foundations. She hired local guides who spoke in hushed tones about the forbidden place, the womb of the goddess that no man dared to enter, and they led her to a section of the ruins that was marked on no official map, a place where the earth seemed to hum with a subtle energy that only she could perceive. She spent 3 days at the site, fasting and meditating, allowing her consciousness to attune to the ancient energies, and on the 3rd night, as the moon rose full and luminous over the desert, she felt the earth beneath her feet vibrate with a resonance that matched the frequency of her own mitochondrial DNA. The ground began to shift, not violently but gently, as though responding to an ancient command, and a section of the temple foundation slowly receded, revealing a dark opening that led down into the earth. She descended into the chamber, guided by a light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, and she found herself in a vast, circular space whose ceiling was painted with constellations that accurately depicted the night sky as it would have appeared 4,000 years ago. The walls were covered with cuneiform inscriptions and images of women, priestesses with serene faces and eyes that held the wisdom of ages, their hands placed over their wombs, which glowed with a soft, internal light. And in the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal carved from black basalt, were hundreds of clay tablets, perfectly preserved, each inscribed with the same symbol, a star within a womb. Lydia picked up one of the tablets, and as her fingers touched the ancient clay, she felt a surge of energy pass through her, a direct transmission of knowledge that bypassed her rational mind and entered directly into her soul. She understood the cuneiform not through translation, but through direct knowing, perceiving the meaning of the words as if they were being spoken directly into her consciousness by the high priestess Enheduanna herself. I, Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon, high priestess of Inanna, write this final testament for those who will come after, when the world has forgotten the true meaning of the divine feminine and the creative power of the pure womb. We, the priestesses of Inanna, carried in our blood the lineage of the goddess, the capacity to channel her consciousness and to manifest her creative power through our bodies. We knew the secret of the starry womb, the immaculate conception that allowed us to bring forth life without male seed, not as a miracle, but as a sacred science, a spiritual technology that activated latent potentials in the feminine body through profound connection with the cosmic creative principle. The tablets described in meticulous detail the practices that the priestesses had used to achieve this state. Specific meditations that focused on the womb as a cosmic portal, breathwork techniques that circulated energy through the reproductive organs, dietary regimens that purified the body, and sacred sexual practices that cultivated a profound connection between the priestess and the goddess. The texts explained that the blood of Inanna was not just a genetic marker, but an energetic signature, a vibrational frequency that could be passed through the maternal line and that could be activated through these practices, allowing the women who carried it to become living vessels for the goddess's creative power. The patriarchal armies came, Enheduanna wrote, and they destroyed our temples, burned our scrolls, and murdered our priestesses because they understood that our power threatened their dominion. They could not allow women to know that they could create without men, that the divine feminine contained within itself the complete template for life and consciousness. So they demonized our goddess, called us witches and harlots, and rewrote the mythologies to make the male god supreme and the female subordinate. But they could not destroy the blood. They could not erase the lineage. They could only drive it into hiding, encoding its secrets in symbols and oral traditions that would be passed down in whispers from mother to daughter until the time was right for its re-emergence. Lydia understood that the story of the Virgin Mary and the Immaculate Conception was a distorted echo of this ancient knowledge, a sanitized version of the truth that had been appropriated by the patriarchal church to serve its own agenda. Mary, she realized, was likely a descendant of this very lineage, a woman who had been initiated into the remnants of the Inanna mysteries and who had conceived Jesus through the ancient practices, but whose story had been rewritten to fit the emerging Christian narrative, transforming her into a passive vessel for a male god's will rather than an active practitioner of sacred feminine power. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. Lydia spent months in the chamber, translating the tablets, and as she did, she felt the blood of Inanna awakening within her own body, a subtle but profound shift in her energetic field, a connection to her womb that felt both ancient and utterly new. She began practicing the meditations and breathwork techniques described in the texts, and she found herself experiencing states of consciousness that transcended anything she had ever known, moments when she felt directly connected to the cosmic creative principle, when her womb hummed with a subtle energy that felt like the stirrings of new life. She understood that her discovery was not just an academic breakthrough, but a spiritual calling, that she was meant to be one of the women who would help restore the blood of Inanna lineage in the modern world, bringing forward the ancient knowledge that had been suppressed for thousands of years. She knew that this would make her a target, that the same patriarchal forces that had destroyed Inanna's temples would resist the re-emergence of feminine creative power. But she also knew that the time for hiding was over, that the earth itself was calling for the return of the goddess, for the rebalancing of masculine and feminine energies that was essential for humanity's survival. She emerged from the chamber not as a scholar, but as a priestess, a woman who carried in her blood the awakened consciousness of Inanna, and she began to share her findings with a small group of women who had also felt the call, women who had been drawn to her work through dreams and synchronicities, women who recognized in Lydia's story an echo of their own deepest longings. Together, they formed a modern sisterhood of Inanna, not recreating the ancient cult, but adapting its practices for the contemporary world, teaching women how to awaken the blood within themselves, how to connect with their wombs as portals to cosmic creative power, how to reclaim the Immaculate Conception as a latent human capacity rather than a singular miracle. The scientific community dismissed her claims as pseudoscience, and religious institutions condemned her as a heretic. But Lydia no longer cared about external validation because she had found something far more valuable: direct experience of the divine feminine, the knowing that came from within, the power that flowed through her own body when she connected with the blood of Inanna. She watched as the women in her sisterhood experienced profound transformations, healing physical ailments, awakening psychic abilities, and developing a deep sense of purpose that came from understanding themselves as living vessels for the goddess's creative power. In her final years, as illness consumed her body but left her consciousness blazing with the light of Inanna, Lydia returned to the chamber beneath Uruk and added her own testament to the clay tablets, her words joining those of Enheduanna and the countless priestesses who had come before. She wrote that the blood of Inanna was not just a genetic lineage, but a spiritual inheritance, a potential that lived in every woman's body, waiting to be awakened through conscious practice and profound connection with the cosmic creative principle. The lineage they denied is rising again, Lydia wrote, not as a threat to men but as a complement, not as a rejection of the masculine but as a rebalancing of the sacred partnership that was always meant to exist between masculine and feminine, between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter. Inanna returns, not as a goddess to be worshipped from afar, but as a consciousness to be embodied from within, a creative power that flows through every woman's womb when she remembers what she is, when she reclaims what was suppressed, when she awakens the blood that connects her to the ancient mothers, to the starry womb, to the cosmic creative principle itself. The Immaculate Conception is not a myth, but a mystery. Not a miracle, but a potential. Not a singular event, but an ongoing process that is happening now in thousands of women across the planet who are awakening the blood of Inanna and bringing forth a new consciousness, a new humanity, a new world that honors the divine feminine in all its forms, that celebrates the creative power of the pure womb, that remembers what the church denied, and that restores what was lost when the goddess was driven into hiding, for she was never destroyed, only sleeping, waiting for her daughters to awaken her by awakening themselves, by claiming the blood that flows through all who choose to remember, to practice, to embody the sacred feminine that is the source of all life and the key to humanity's future. The chamber remains beneath Uruk, its location known to the sisterhood of Inanna, and the tablets continue to transmit their ancient wisdom to those who are ready to receive it, to those who carry the blood and who are willing to undergo the initiations that awaken its power. And the goddess lineage that the church denied is re-emerging, not as a historical artifact, but as a living force, a spiritual revolution that is happening in the hearts and wombs of women across the globe, proving that truth cannot be permanently suppressed, and that the divine feminine, once driven into hiding, will always return, bringing with her the secrets of life and death, the mysteries of creation, and the power to transform not just individual lives, but the entire planet, restoring the balance that was lost and ushering in a new age where the blood of Inanna flows freely once again, nourishing all life and reminding humanity that the Immaculate Conception was never a singular event, but an eternal potential, a sacred science, a divine inheritance that lives in every woman's body, waiting to be awakened, waiting to be claimed, waiting to be celebrated as the ultimate expression of creative power, the source of all life, the heart of the goddess that beats in every pure womb. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.